the medical school, and they definitely needed to look at some way that they could generate funds. And I realize those seats are fully paid for, so we're not subsidizing them here in Nova Scotia. And I think you know, from my understanding of it, having spoken to the dean of the medical school, it doesn't take anything away from our students who are still getting, you know, a top-notch education, and that the university is doing all it can to maintain its standards and even strengthen its standards. I think I may have mentioned here before, my father had graduated from that school in the 1950s, and so I'm, you know, although it's a fair distance from myself, nevertheless, I'm pretty proud of it, and glad to see them keeping their standard, because it was a school that was recognized, and I think still is recognized, you know, all over the world. You could travel anywhere with a degree from Dalhousie's medical school. So something, you know, I think to be proud of, and a school that we want to maintain at the highest level. But my concern is where the money went, and the minister will remember last year there was a little bit of a back and forth and confusion around a decrease in funds to the medical school. It might have been just over $2 million had been allocated the year before. Suddenly it looked like $300,000 was all there was left there for Dal's Medical School, and you asked, I believe, the former Deputy Minister Hogg to go and have a look at it, examine the funding, because there was some confusion around the Department of Education perhaps providing funds to the school. And you know, I know that there was a compromise at the end of the day. More funds were put into the medical school because it was needed. Without it, you know, really they would have been severely hampered. So now we see this increase, the amount increased by 1.668. I don't think that was the only item that was in that increase, and I wonder if the minister would have a look and let us know, let the members of the House know what is included in the increase that we're talking about. So again, it's focusing on Dal Medical School.
The Honourable Minister for Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So I think what I indicated earlier was that in this fiscal year, 11-12, in the budget for the year coming, we have moved Dalhousie Medical and the physician resident tuition from other programs. They were in the other programs to medical payments. So they've been moved out of that. And physician training seats was moved from other healthcare initiatives to medical payments. Madam Chair, I think of all of the complicated issues, and there are many of them in the Department of Health, the one that has been the most complicated is on the various arrangements that have been made with Dalhousie with respect to physician seats and various payments. It would make your head spin trying to figure out all of the arrangements. And I'm not really sure why that is. It seems to me it should be very straightforward with you know, good documentation, but I wasn't there, and neither were any of the folks who were with me, and so it can be a bit of a challenge to sort out. First, I would like to speak to the question of the 10 seats that Dalhousie have established a relationship with Saudi Arabia. Just for clarity for people here, Dalhousie had 20 medical school seats for students from New Brunswick, paid for by New Brunswick. And a number of years ago, the decision was made to move those seats to an off-site program in New Brunswick. And so at that time, the medical school and the Department of Health here in Nova Scotia were well aware that this was going to occur at a future time. And as I understand it, again, I wasn't here, but as I understand it, the administration of the day decided to purchase 10 of those seats, and that became the expansion of Nova Scotia's expansion of having 10 additional seats in 2008. And the 10 additional seats were then available. Dalhousie had the resources, the faculty, the classrooms, all of that kind of stuff. But the Nova Scotia government had already purchased half of the available seats, and at that time felt that that's what was both perhaps required and affordable. And there had been an expansion a few years earlier as well. And so, as the honourable member said, now students from Saudi Arabia will be taking those seats, and those seats are not subsidized in any way by the Nova Scotia taxpayer, and they weren't seats that we ever had real access to. They were always seats that existed at the medical school, and they were therefore dedicated to students from New Brunswick. So this year, the actual amount of money that is in this year's budget for Dal Med School is, so last year we gave Dalhousie Med School $2,575,100 for medical school seats. And this year that has increased. Oh, this year there's an additional this year, there's an allocation of $540,000, and we have a review that is currently underway between the Department of Health and Welfare, Education, and the Dal Medical School, and they're reviewing all of the funding. We expect that there will be a report to us in the next few weeks, and it will assist us in our decision. And this is this is the current situation.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And, you know, I have no doubt the minister is right that any one of us would find our head spinning if we actually got into the details of this. Definitely, the Department of Health is a very complex department, I will say, you know, as the critic for this area. I don't have a medical background at all myself, and I found there's an awful lot of detail and components and a lot of complexity. And on this education piece, I am kind of surprised it's the most complex, but nevertheless, things have developed over time. I want to just clarify, you gave us a clear figure for last year of $2,575,000. You said that there's an allocation of $540,000, but I don't understand, or it's not clear to me, is that an increase? Is that a temporary payment while you wait for the report that you referred to? A report is coming, you said, in the next few weeks, and it is being developed by the Department of Education, Health, and Dalhousie University. So what is the $540,000 allocation? I'm just a little uncertain about what you're intending that to be. Again, is it an increase, or is it maybe just a partial payment while we figure it out? And I hope the minister has that.
The Honourable Minister for Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I think it's fair to say that we're in discussion with Dalhousie with respect to the funding for this year for the medical school seats.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Okay, thank you very much. I do appreciate that. And I guess in terms of the amount of money, again, I would like to look, because you've got 1.668, just going back to the medical payments increase. And that increase of 1.668 was physician residents and Dalhousie. And I think the physician residents, would you not consider that part of the medical school as well? or perhaps not. And so could you break those two down for me? They've graduated, but are they considered part of your medical component? They're still studying. And certainly the Dalhousie Medical School, when they look at how many students they'll take in and how they can accommodate their students, they are very aware of the residency places, and they see it as a continuum of the education of those students. So I just wonder, you know, and again, that's just clarity for us, because I didn't see the word Dalhousie anywhere in these estimates at all. So I'd just like to know if you can break that down around physician residents and Dalhousie University.
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have $647,000 for physician resident tuition. And then in addition to that, we have the $540,000 that I indicated for physician training seats. And as well, $480,000 for the 8 additional seats. So this is all around those additional seats, or some of this is around the expansions, you know, for the various seats.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Okay, thanks very much. I wonder if you could, it's not usually like me to ask the minister to elaborate, but because that could go on, but I'm doing it a little hesitantly, but I wonder if you could elaborate on those 8 additional seats. Just give us some clarity on what they are. I mean, you certainly talked about where we were at, that we'd lost 20 seats when New Brunswick set up their satellite school for medicine. We've got 10 new ones that the previous government picked up. We are at, I think we have 63 spaces for Nova Scotian students. What are the 8 additional seats? And I'm sorry if I missed that in an earlier answer.
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Okay, fair enough. It's a fair question, and hopefully this will help. I find it difficult myself, to be frank. In 2003-04 and in 2008-09, the government requested that Dalhousie increase the number of medical school undergraduates, the number of seats, and funding for those seats was provided through the Department of Health. In 09-10, the Department of Health gave notice to Dalhousie that it would continue to fund only the 8 medical school seats that were not already funded. If you remember, the issue was, were they also being funded under the Department of Education's funding formula when the new MOU was negotiated? That was the question. And Dalhousie did not agree with the department's interpretation of the funding for the physician training seats and the funding commitment. And so Bill Hogg did an independent review, and he concluded that there was a commitment, and we gave the $2 million plus last year to the medical school. However, there was an agreement that we needed to put together a working group to try to sort out the whole issue of funding of medical school seats on a go-forward basis. And that working group is meeting. It will report in several weeks, and for that reason, it hasn't reached any conclusion. So the question will become, you know, how many of those seats, that's right, how many of those seats, and what is the cost of a medical school seat? If you read the Hogg report, it's quite, you know, it is again quite complex, and there are a number of unresolved issues that we would like to reach some conclusion to and some agreement on before we finalize this.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you very much. And that does, the 8 then really refers to the 8 that the Department of Health felt were legitimately funded through the Department of Health at this point in time of those additional seats. So I guess I get where that's coming from. And I know there's a big difference in the amount that each province is paying for seats. So hopefully this will clarify it when you get the working group results back. And I don't have it before me, but I think that Nova Scotia pays considerably less per seat than the province of New Brunswick and the few seats that are held for the province of PEI. Isn't it like 20,000, 30,000 and more? I don't know if the minister wants to even mention it. I think we're the lowest of the funding of each of the seats, although the Nova Scotia government has the lion's share of those seats, and I'm glad we do, because we all have constituents who would like to apply there and would like to get into the school. So it is an important thing that we have the school here in Nova Scotia. But you know, I guess that will have to be worked out, because the university feels, I think, under a lot of pressure to maintain its credentials and maintain its standards, where I was speaking of those earlier. It's pretty important. When a year ago we had them you know, sort of questioned in terms of their accreditation, and there were steps that had to be put in place in order for the med school to just reassert itself and ensure that it was meeting all the curriculum that was required. And, you know, I think it would be a crisis, really, if that were to be threatened at any point. And so, I realize you've got the working group coming back, but I would like to see where we go with that in the future. I don't think unless the minister wants to speak to that, I think I'll go on to a couple of other questions about financial things, and if the minister would like to add a comment on or a summation on Dalhousie, we can go there. The residency seats, I think, are equally as important, because I understand that's the big holdup. We could have taken more Nova Scotia students or more maritime students in those 10 seats that the Saudi Arabians have taken, but we also have the problem of not enough residency spots to ensure that the students are going to be looked after in the next step, and apparently they won't go beyond a certain number if we don't fund more residencies. So, you know, that's a concern as well, and I would hope that at some point the government will be able to fund more in the areas that we really need. You know, focused not to the areas perhaps where even students are flocking, but the areas that are underserved, where Nova Scotia could benefit, and our needs here can be met, which I think has to be the government's #1 concern, because certainly we're going to talk more, I know, about physician recruitment and rural physicians. I know that the member from Yarmouth has some questions, particularly about his area. The Valley has been an area where we've been concerned as well. So I'd like to go again, if we could, back to 4.4. That's page 4.4, which has a list of various line items, one by one. The top one is the general administration, which seems to have jumped up by 50%. It's up to $3 million, just over $3 million, and it was last year forecast at just barely over $2 million. So that, even having merged two departments, part of the benefit should have been that we would actually see a shrinking of administration. You're not just rolling both of the hierarchies together. You should actually have, I would imagine, have done that not only for some internal efficiencies, but also for some financial efficiencies. So I wonder if you could talk to or if through the chair, Madam Chair, if the minister could let us know what is accounting for $1 million increase, a 50% increase in general administration. Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much. I would like to close off the discussion around the Dalhousie Medical School and the seats and the whole question of residency positions and what have you. I mean, I think, you know, in a perfect world, we would have the ability to just have as many seats at the medical school as there are people who want to go to medical school, who have the necessary qualifications. And then all of those residency placements afterwards. I don't know if people recognize that the seats at the medical school are heavily subsidized by the government of Nova Scotia, and that the residency placements are also heavily subsidized by the government of Nova Scotia. We pay the wages of people who have who are in residency positions, and we pay their tuition as well, and a number of other costs. And so the sad reality is that we have to look at our ability to pay for an expanded medical program. We're very fortunate to have Dell Medical School. Without question, it's an excellent medical school, and it graduates many excellent physicians. And I'm very cognizant of that, as are people in the department. We are very fortunate in Nova Scotia to have seen 2 expansions, 2 seats at the medical school, and many of those students have not yet graduated, so we're still not realizing the benefit in the practice world of those expansions. And I do remind members that Nova Scotia, we have more physicians per capita than any province in the country, more specialists per capita than any province in the country. But the distribution of our physicians tends to be the problem. The Department of Health have embarked on a physician resource plan, something that is very, very long overdue, much like, a number of other initiatives that we have going on in the department. To me, it's hard to believe that we were expanding medical school seats and we didn't have a physician resource plan. We didn't know where the docs were. We didn't know what the future looks like in terms of planning for retirement and all of that kind of stuff. So this is such a critical piece of work to help us determine how many doctors we need and where we need them. And we're in conversation certainly with the medical school with respect to this. At our medical school right now, we have 256 seats that are allocated to Nova Scotian students. And it's interesting, I want to share with the members, Madam Chair, that I had a discussion with staff in the department who are the experts on this, and I was trying to, understand how this all works and understand from them just how many seats we actually have, and it became clear to me that it's very complicated. I understand, for example, that PEI purchases, 5 seats or something like that, but last year, perhaps this year, they didn't have 5 applicants that met the criteria to get in. So that doesn't mean that the medical school then will leave a seat open. They might fill that seat with a student who's from Nova Scotia who meets the criteria, and so there's some flexibility. It's somewhat fluid in terms, so it isn't this rigid, there's a Nova Scotia seat, you have to put a Nova Scotia person in that seat. The other thing I don't think that we have a very good handle on, and I don't know why we don't, I think there has to be a way to get a better information on is, what about all of those Nova Scotian students who go to McGill or University of Toronto? or even to an Australian medical school, or a medical school in Ireland. Like, we have a fair number of Nova Scotian residents who go and study medicine elsewhere. And how do we take advantage of that situation? How do we ensure that we have some way to identify and then to attempt to bring them home? And from time to time, I certainly hear from students and from a family member, perhaps, of a Nova Scotian student who's studying elsewhere. I think it's also important to note that Dalhousie Medical School has a certain number of seats that are for students from out of province, from other parts of Canada as well. And I'm not, to be frank, entirely sure how the funding works with respect to those seats. And so university funding is complex, and medical school funding is very complex, and physician resource planning then for the needs of the population it's very interesting. It's a very interesting process. But what I can say is we have, and we attempt to have, as good a working relationship as we possibly can with the university and with the medical school, and we very much value their work. The other thing the member talked about was the difference in funding. You know, that we don't necessarily fund the seats at the same level as other provinces. And I think we have to, I think we have to again recognize that you're not necessarily comparing apples to apples, that there could be other features. Like, so for example, we have AFPs in this province, the alternate payment plans for specialists. And part of the funding that we give to different specialties, let's say the cardiac folks or the psychiatric folks, portions of that are for teaching, for administration, for research, as well as for clinical practice. And so that is, I don't know if you would say it's an indirect way to fund the seats, because these folks who are all on the academic staff at the university are having some portion of their remuneration built in, which really is, you know, the whole point of funding seats. So, you know, it's complicated. It doesn't mean that we in fact aren't funding medical school seats here in Nova Scotia at the same rate as, you know, Saskatchewan, that has one medical school and no other universities either. This funding of seats is interesting. Okay, so the member, Madam Chair, asked me about the rising cost of general administration in the Department of Health. And the costs that are associated with these increases are for a number of things. We have put in place an individual who is in charge of implementing Better Care Sooner. This is a person who is has been a staff member in the policy unit in the department, and is in this position. There are some associated costs for professional services with Dr. Ross. We are doing some work, and we've given some priority to the whole question of diversity and inclusion for workforce planning in the department. As members will know, we face the real potential of labor shortages in skilled work in the province. And in the healthcare sector, we need to be very concerned about this. We need to do a lot of work for good workforce planning. And one of the things that I think all members in here would recognize and would be concerned about is that we can do a much better job than we have done with respect to diversity and inclusion in terms of our health human resources. And I'm often struck by the fact that women have made great strides with respect to their participation in the labor force. And in fact, in healthcare, for example, you will find a very large number of women who have actually risen to managerial positions and seem to be well represented throughout the health services workforce. But that's not the case for other groups. It's not the case for African Nova Scotians, for people from First Nations communities, people with disabilities, even newcomers who have very significant employment histories in healthcare, in the healthcare field. So we are increasing the diversity and inclusion component of the Department of Health, and at a level where there will be a better ability to do workforce planning with this in mind. Additionally, there is an increase reflected there of $200,000 for the social marketing division, which has been merged from HPP. So you will see this. We have an increase in secretarial support to the minister, to the deputy minister, around correspondence. We have a significant amount of correspondence, and I'm told that we are seeing more correspondence than is normally the case in the department. I attribute this, frankly, to the phenomenon of social media. And I think I heard Dr. Brian Goldman on this a few weeks ago, or someone else talked about social media and its role now in advocating for drugs, for new treatments, and new procedures. And it has meant that the existing staff have really been challenged to get the correspondence responded to in a timely fashion. And that's something that I'm concerned about. So we have introduced assistance there. And I think that essentially covers the larger items. There also is an increase in the salaries for Communications Nova Scotia employees, the professional services. And I would think that reflects the government's, and the member may have heard me discuss this with the leader of the third party, the government's intention to communicate with respect to Dr. Ross's recommendation that we need to do a better job of communicating with people in the province around healthcare services and how to access healthcare services. And I would say to the members that if there was one thing I heard when I did my consultations around the province from people, people said they did not know. They did not know, and they felt that people in their communities didn't have enough information about 811, and that we needed to do more to promote 811. And additionally, to let people know about 911 and how qualified paramedics actually were. And I actually remember meeting with the board of the Capital District Health Authority, and one of the physician members saying to me, we really needed to consider doing some public education about what is a hospital, so people would understand the difference between physician services in an office and other healthcare providers, and perhaps coming to a hospital. At any rate, that does account for the increase. Thank you, Madam Chair.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you very much, and certainly that was a very detailed answer, and perhaps, I don't know if it's possible for the minister just to get that one page, the breakdown on the general administration, just so that we can see it. Yesterday, we definitely heard that the number of communications people is down, and I gather they've been reclassified then if their salaries are up. So we went from 12 to 9, and I agree we have to communicate and have the public understand what's available. And could the minister tell me about her own office, the administration for the minister's office, if you could tell me what was the forecasted amount last year and what's budgeted for this year to adequately serve the public. And I would agree with the minister. I think the critics of health are getting lots of the letters that are directed to the health minister, and when we're copied on them, we don't need to provide that primary response to the same degree. And certainly, you know, I've been inundated this week with a whole lot of them coming from another lobby group that's asking about the Canada Health Act. I think I counted 135. Mind you, they're all the same. They're not individual stories. Sometimes they're very different stories that we're getting, and people telling, you know, compelling reasons why we should look at their issue or try and respond to their you know, their crisis very often. And I can only imagine how emotionally difficult it is to be the Minister of Health at times with the crisis that people do find themselves in when they turn to the minister. But if you could answer me on the minister's office expense last year and this, that would be great.
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And yes, it's an interesting time, I think. I suppose every person in the Department of Health and in the Minister's office might think that, but I think it is a very interesting time because of the growing use of social media, in particular, and Facebook and Twitter, and these particular new tools that people have for communication. So I think what that means is, you know, a member of the public, one of the things that even in my short brief time in the department I've seen is that an individual who is you know, dealing with the healthcare system and encounters a particular issue that they want to explore can raise that and send it to all of their friends, who can send it to all of their friends, and then suddenly I can literally have hundreds of contacts from people, not just from Nova Scotia, but from all over the world, really, who have an interest in that particular topic, and suddenly can flood our mailboxes with ideas and comments and what have you. And so it is it's a new era for sure in communicating with the public, and it's very interesting. Now, Madam Chair, the member has asked about the costs of general administration in the Office of the Minister, and the budget last year was $316,000. The forecast is $301,200. So we are hoping to come in slightly under budget to about $15,000. And next year we have budgeted $320,900. So it's pretty stable, I would say.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to move on to the area that the minister actually referenced herself around the physician, I guess, planning for the numbers and getting a handle on that. That is a question I've asked on a couple of occasions here during question period, often because anecdotally we know in certain areas of the province when there's going to be a number of retirements, or we know when people are moving, or they've only made a commitment to stay a couple of years. So the people in a community will be able to forecast and say that they're concerned that there's going to be, you know, a sudden shortage of physicians. The Valley is the area, I think particularly they have a number of doctors that are carrying full caseloads and patient loads, and yet they are well past retirement age. So these are just, you know, people who are just committed to their patients and their community. But we know that the Department of Health should have a handle on where, you know, where the needs are going to arise, and exactly how many young Nova Scotians do we need to stay in the province to fill those positions, the large investment we make to train those young people, and very often they may leave our province unless we've targeted and helped to in some way entice them to stay here. And one of the questions, or I guess the question right now I have, because the minister mentioned it as an ongoing study, that there is a physician, at least on the physician side, a study underway, but you have a line item called health system workforce. And that line item is the bottom one on 14.4, and it's gone down actually by, you know, $2 million, just about $2 million. It was forecast last year at 3.78 million, and it is estimated right now at 1.97, so just about $2 million on the estimate. Health system workforce is what it's called. And so with a decrease of 1.8 million, I was wondering where it went instead, and whether that was the health physician resource plan, and maybe that's been buried somewhere else. There was a tender, and just while the minister's looking, and I know that the staff you have with you are searching that out, our staff did give us the tender that was called in February, I believe. The closing date was February 23rd. And that was the RFP for a health physician resource plan. So, you know, this is something the minister may be able to speak to as well, to actually let us know if it has been awarded, because you did talk about work being underway. And is the cost of that RSFP part of contract administration? I did want to explore a little bit with the minister about consultants and special projects. So I'm just wondering where the cost for that RFP would be located. I don't see what the value of that RFP is at all. I see 5 companies are listed there, as maybe those are the 5 that you invited to tender. I would be interested to know what the project is tendered at, and whether there's a deadline for when we'll get the plan back. So I know that the minister's being briefed, but I'd like to know more about that RFP, when we'll see back, what the value was, who's doing the work, when are we going to get an answer, and whether or not it's connected to the line item health system workforce, which is actually down instead of up. So I have an idea it's not connected to that, but I'd like to know about that too. So I think somehow the 2 components, I think, may be interrelated. And if the minister is ready, then I'd like to turn the floor over to her, if we could, Madam Chair.
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. First, I'm going to talk about physician recruitment. The information I have indicates that we had a net gain of eight physicians, family practitioners last year, and 12 specialists, a total of 20. And, you know, we have seen 4 physicians retire, several physicians, a number of, 4 specialists retire. No retirements that we know of in terms of family practitioners, but 5 family practitioners simply became inactive in terms of their licenses, I suppose. And we did see 24 family practitioners leave the province, 31 specialists leave the province. However, we had 57 specialists recruited and 39 family practitioners recruited for a total of 96. So the net gain was, again, 8 family practitioners and 12 specialists. And we've also had a number of new CAP doctors, 7 new CAP doctors in the province. The interesting thing, I think, sometimes when I look at these numbers is, again, where the distribution is. In the Capital District Health Authority, we had 14 family practitioners and 36 specialists for a total of 52. But then you look at other DHAs, you know, Cape Breton, 3 family practitioners, 3 specialists for a total of 6. It's quite stark. Gasha, 1 new family practitioner, 1 specialist, for a total of 2. Oh, no, that's not Gasha, that's Colchester, I think. Oh, what's 7? 7 Gasha? Yes, it is Gasha. Now, mind you, you know, so those numbers are very small too, right, into Gasha. But then again, I ask myself, I mean, Gasha has a very stable number of physicians in the Antigonish area, in the Guysborough area, what have you. But again, this is why I think the physician resource plan is very important. With respect to the request for proposals, I have no additional information to give the member at this time. Decisions have not been made with respect to the awarding of that request, and I don't feel comfortable really having a discussion about that until we move forward with it. So the information, Madam Chair, that the member and all members would have access to is what you actually have. With respect to that budget item, health service workforce, there is in that line item a Health Canada project on health human resources that was a $1 million item on its own. And then in addition to that, there are a number of much smaller projects for the most part and items that you know, are small amounts of money that make up the additional reductions. So there was a budget error, for example, around workers' comp that is in the amount of $100,000. I mentioned the diversity and the social inclusion position that was moved into general administration. That came from this line item in the past, so this is where that resided. The Health Canada project has ended, and this is why that's resulted in a reduction in expenditure. That's right. So, in addition to that, there was a term position was removed for a HR consultant and a student, $29,600. A health strategic initiatives position, which is finishing and is classified, I think, at the secretarial 2 level for $31,000. So there are just a number of small items that's right. It's the $1 million for that Health Canada project that really constitutes the largest reduction, but there's a good explanation for that.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. And you know, I understand if the RFP hasn't been awarded yet that you can't say more about it. But I guess following up on questions from last year and probably last fall, I would just say I think this is one of the glaring areas where the department can't tell you where you're at. And if you don't know where you're at, you don't know where you're going. And you haven't surveyed those physicians to find out their plans for retirement or moving or career progression. So, you know, and the minister said it herself, so I'm really repeating the minister's thoughts that we're at a disadvantage in this province if we can't get a handle on those kind of numbers. So I'm just saying it closed February 23rd, and I think it is an urgent matter, and I know you can't say even how long the work will take. I used to be a consultant, and I know to do a decent job, you can't be asked for a report in a month because you have to get out and do the footwork and gather the information and talk to people and write a coherent report. So, you know, I would hope that we can find something, you know, and have some information perhaps within 6 months that would be useful to all of us here in the House, the individual members and so on. You know, we need more information. There's an awful lot missing in the Department of Health. I think we only have about 5 minutes to go on this round, perhaps a little bit more. About 5 minutes, so it's difficult to get into too much here. But one of the things that I would say that concerns me is that we can't find out the cost of procedures in our hospital. We can't compare whether a new procedure is a better way than an old procedure. When I've contacted Capital Health District, which would be the one for my area and my riding, they can't tell you what is a cost that they would associate with a particular procedure. So that makes it really difficult then. And the minister, particularly when she first was introduced to the department, I guess became the minister, I often heard you talk about evidence-based, that I shouldn't say you, but through the chair, Madam Chair, that the minister wanted to base all of her decisions on good, solid evidence, research, and so on. And that is, I think, something that we would all support. And, you know, all of us are at a disadvantage if we don't have good information. So I don't know if the minister can talk about, in the last couple of minutes, about whether there is any move afoot to try and get a better handle on the actual cost of care in our hospitals, because it's a bit of a runaway train without that kind of information. You know, there are options and there's different ways of treating certain disease and certain conditions, and we should know whether the outcomes match the costs and whether we can even put a cost on what it is to bring them into the hospitals. You know, I often hear members of the public tell me that when they are acutely ill, when there's an emergency, when they're very sick, they really have nothing but high praise for our healthcare system. You know, when it is an emergency and they need to have an operation or care immediately, they get it. But we do have a lot of other conditions that languish, where people remain in pain, people remain, you know, immobile or unable to get around because they need certain operations or care, and the system can't respond then as quickly. So I just wonder if the minister could talk about, give us a little bit of background on trying to get a handle on the costs of individual procedures and surgeries and so on.
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. The member brings up a very, I think, a very important issue. You know, it's quite incredible to not just me, but to lots of people, about how probably the biggest, most important public service that we have is so under, it's so lacking in technological capacity. You know, you still can go into places, physicians' offices, where people are using paper transactions. Now, that's not the situation in our hospitals. They are very highly computerized. However, we have a long way to go with respect to our information systems. And we're in the very early stages of doing some of the work to help us gather information with respect to, you know, these items. We can, I think, in the department identify units, and there are probably some you know, processes that do exist to help us define the cost of care for certain procedures. I know, you know, if you're from another country and you come here and you happen to have a heart attack and you end up in a hospital here, there are, you know, some kind of standard rates that you will be billed for being in a hospital, and there are rates if you're in a private room versus, say, but whether or not they accurately reflect the cost of the actual care that's provided is, you know, I really don't know. And these are things that we probably should know and need to know if we're going to do better planning in our healthcare system. So again, there is a great deal of work underway to build better information systems to help give us quality information that will allow us to do better planning. But are we there yet? No, we aren't there yet. The federal government has been very much a player in terms of supporting provinces adopt new information technology. And that hasn't always been a smooth rollout. There have been a few little bumps along the way in that. A small province like Nova Scotia does rely on federal dollars to help us build that kind of infrastructure. But at any rate, you know, the work is underway, but it's in the very early stages. There is quite a significant way to go. Thank you.
Seeing no other speakers for the official opposition, I will now offer the floor to the Progressive Conservative Party. I now recognize the honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to say that it's a privilege for me to be here today and to speak a little to the Minister of Health about some issues regarding healthcare in the province of Nova Scotia. And it will probably come as no surprise to the Minister that some of my questioning today will be towards MS and the liberation treatment. And the Minister has been responsive to questions in the past, and I just think it's a very important topic that many Nova Scotians are affected by. There are over 3,000 Nova Scotians who are affected by MS. And in this province, there have been a number of those who have left to get the liberation treatment. They've gone to different countries. They've gone as far away as Poland, and now they're going to New York and other areas to have the treatment done. And this MS treatment, the liberation treatment as it's known, is as much about the quality of life for the individual as it is about trying to find a way to live better. Now, in past times here in the House, the Minister has agreed that if a person has gone away and had this treatment done and they come back to Nova Scotia and they need treatment in Nova Scotia, that they will not be refused that. And I certainly want to thank her for that statement and that position, because there are some provinces that don't do that, and I give her full credit for being forward in that way. However, we hear a lot about waiting and doing and listening to what's going to be done on a federal basis. And we all know that healthcare, although there's a mandate by the federal government to supply funding, actual dollars spent are spent by the provinces here in Canada, and they are spent with discretion of the individual's provinces. The minister has spoken with her colleagues on many occasions. She tells us, and I believe her, that she's talking to them about MS. But the reality is, this is a disease that time is not a friend to. The reality is that we need to take some action sooner than later. And as the minister knows, and I'm sure the members of this House know, it is an issue that's very close to me because my own wife suffers from MS, so that some of these questions become closer and dearer to my heart. So my first question to the Minister of Health and Wellness is, indeed, there has been some movement by the provinces of Manitoba and Saskatchewan. There has been some talks by those two provinces as working together, putting towards each of them $5 million towards research of the liberation treatment. And I must say, the liberation treatment is that. It's a treatment. It is not a cure for MS, and it's important that people understand that this is not a cure. But I would wonder if the minister could explain where we are as a province in relationship to actually doing something and not just waiting and waiting and waiting. Because as I say, those who suffer with MS, time is not their friend, and we need to be more proactive as a province and as members of this House. So I would ask the minister that.
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I thank the honourable member for, I think, what is a very important topic, and certainly it's one that I and my staff really grapple with in terms of what is the right thing to do and what is our responsibility. And I want to start by saying that I have never once said that we are not actively pursuing liberation therapy at this time for financial reasons. And I want to say that emphatically right now, once again, because for me, this is not about dollars and cents. This is about safety, and this is about an effective treatment that will make a difference for people. And it's a very difficult situation that we have as non-medical people who take our advice from medical people when you find not necessarily competing medical information, but different points of view in the medical community. If you have different points of view in the medical community, how do you as a layperson make a decision about what's the right thing to do for people? And so this has been a challenge. This whole issue has been a challenge. It's been a challenge for a variety of reasons. There are more than 2,000 people in Nova Scotia who are living with MS. I have tried very hard to understand as much as I can about MS, and I've tried to do that by meeting with people who have MS, by meeting with people who have studied and worked with and treated people with MS for all of their medical careers, like Dr. Jock Murray, a retired former dean of the Faculty of Health Professions, actually, at Dalhousie. You know, other people. I had an opportunity when I was in Newfoundland with the other health ministers to have a presentation by a panel of experts that the federal government had assembled to do a presentation, and on that group were was a vascular surgeon as well as neurologists and some other people. I have read Dr. Jock Murray's book on the history of MS. It's fascinating. It is, I had no idea. It's just fascinating. My own family doctor actually was his research assistant when the research was done for that book. And so this is an issue that I have attempted to understand with my layperson's set of eyes, reading as much as I can and really trying to understand what is the information, where's it coming from, and how do I conduct myself in an ethical, caring way around this issue. And it's hard. I heard a gentleman on the radio this morning on CBC who almost a year ago, I think, had gone to have this treatment. And he talks about the very great benefits that he feels has accrued to him as a result of that treatment. I'll tell you, it's hard to argue with that kind of personal testimony to somebody who's actually been through the treatment. However, I also believe very much in the importance of a process that establishes evidence, that does it in a way that's reliable. I guess I would say I believe in the scientific process. And perhaps that reflects my academic background, but these processes have been developed over a period of time for a reason. They have been developed actually to protect the public. They have been developed to ensure that we, as members of the human family, are not put at the mercy, I suppose, sometimes, of people who may not have the the knowledge, the capacity to be able to be really helpful. And sadly, we do know that, you can go all over the world and get treatments for a whole variety of things. Cancer patients, cancer patients can go to Mexico for the cure for cancer, and for, $15,000, $20,000, you can go through all kinds of procedures that have no scientific support and ultimately do not result in any change in those diagnoses. I met with Dr. Murray. He's a very interesting man, very considered in his approach. He said it's important that the scientific community do not dismiss this treatment out of hand. We have to keep an open mind. We have to explore the very real potential that this may result in something that is of benefit to people with MS. And that, I would like to think, is the way I will approach this. Keep an open mind, be hopeful that we can build that scientific, evidence-based foundation that will lead us to the information that we require to know that this is a safe and effective treatment. And I think that the measures that the health ministers took as a group in Newfoundland with the federal government will bring us there. First of all, there are these 7 studies that have been put in, that are underway throughout North America. And these studies are, first of all, they're studying in an attempt to establish the link between MS and blocked veins. And that's an important link to establish. You talk to the neurologists and the vascular people, and they say that, well, they don't know for sure. I mean, is it MS people who have blocked veins? Are there people who don't have MS who have blocked veins? Is it Parkinson's? Does this have implications for other neurological diseases like Parkinson's and other diseases? There needs to be some basic science that establishes that link. And that link has still not been proven. And that's the first step. And that's where the studies are right now. The studies are, I think the study out of Quebec is looking at children with MS, and studies elsewhere are looking at adults. There are also questions around the stages of MS. Is it a treatment that you require only at an early stage? Would it lose its effectiveness at a later stage? There are many, many, many questions that I certainly can't answer, and neither can the clinicians in our healthcare system. And so we need to establish, we need to establish the parameters, and we need to get the basic information. We as health ministers asked that the scientific community fast track the research. This is unprecedented, by the way. There is no other example in living memory where health ministers across the country with the federal government have established a scientific panel and have said, get research up and running and answer these questions as quickly as you can. That has never occurred before. So while I very much appreciate the frustration that people who have MS, who want to see this treatment implemented like yesterday, we are acting in an unprecedented way to actually make resources available, to get studies underway, to get answers as quickly as is humanly possible inside a model that requires, some period of time to observe people with MS and to establish what the basic, biology, physiology, or whatever is of that situation, and move that forward. And so that is occurring. Now, I also more recently, and I follow this very carefully, I follow, anytime I hear there's going to be a conference, I ask my staff, please follow the newspaper reports, the media reports from that country. Will there be Canadians in attendance? Let's find a way to keep ourselves informed about what's going on. So I understand that, first of all, the status today of clinical trials in this country, there are none. There are no clinical trials in Canada today. So I don't know, what the Saskatchewan and Manitoba governments' thoughts are, or their process in terms of establishing clinical trials. But the Premier of Saskatchewan announced clinical trials about a year ago. He first announced clinical trials at least a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, a year ago. Today, there are no clinical trials in the province of Saskatchewan. And why is that? Clinical trials require a certain process. And they require a research design. You have to design your research so that you have to do it within some rules so that the results, when you get results, are reliable. Because if you don't design it properly, and you publish your results, they will have no credibility. They'll be attacked by everyone because you haven't done a certain number of things. And doing research design, I can't imagine what that would be like in a medical context. And I've done research as a social scientist, and I know how difficult that process is to anticipate all of the problems that can arise. And all of the ethical questions. Generally, when you design research, as a researcher, you have to take your research proposal and submit it to an ethical review. So, and in medicine, you have to really observe medical, ethical guidelines. You have to be sure that people are participating fully informed. You have to be sure that you have anticipated all of the difficulties that could arise, and you're prepared to be transparent and accountable and abandon the research if anything goes wrong, if the findings that you're starting to get indicate that there are safety questions. And believe me, the rigorous review that people will be subjected to in terms of just their research design is substantial. And so it's not possible to rush right out and do research. The Premier of Saskatchewan can announce clinical trials today, but it will take a fairly significant period of time to be able to actually do a clinical trial. So there are no clinical trials in Canada right now, but I understand that clinical trial research is about to begin in other places. And I think, one of the things that I would like to encourage people who decide to put themselves forward for clinical trials is to protect themselves. You need to understand that, if you're going to participate in a clinical trial, don't allow yourself to be charged money, for example, to do that. That needs to be part of the process of the clinical trial. It's that your participation and the costs associated with that, for example, should be should be part of that, and people don't pay to participate in a research project. At any rate, this is the situation that we have. We have a seemingly new treatment that has potential benefit for some, perhaps all, perhaps not all, some group of people with MS. And we are attempting to establish what the parameters of that looks like. What is the connection between the blocked veins and MS? For whom would this treatment be safe and beneficial? How do we know that? And how would we move forward to actual clinical trials that then will help us understand and answer in a much more complete way those, I think, really important questions. I have said, the Premier has said, that when clinical trials are able to move forward in this country based on the scientific evidence and the advice of the scientific panel, we in the province of Nova Scotia will participate. But until we have that certainty, then I do not, I will not take the responsibility, frankly, as Minister of Health, of approving a treatment for whom I have not been given the assurance that it is safe and it is beneficial. And that isn't just with respect to MS. That is with respect to any experimental treatment. And, you know, I have letters, you have letters, you've received letters from the insulin diabetes experimental treatment that's going on in Alberta. And, you know, that's basically the same position that I have taken on that. You know, until there is an accepted recognition of a particular treatment by the scientific community, I really feel that it's incumbent on me as Minister of Health to be cautious, optimistic, very hopeful that we will arrive at a place where we will have the information that will allow treatment to proceed. But we're not there yet. And in the meantime, we will attempt to do the utmost that we can for people in this province who have MS with respect to what it is we do have available and things that we can do. I spoke with a lady not so long ago who I actually met the night that I was at the MS Society, who is caring for her husband who has MS and is his MS has progressed substantially along the progression. You know, the issues that she raised trouble me in terms of the capacity of our healthcare system to offer services and make people at that stage in this disease comfortable. Her husband is not mobile anymore and hasn't been able to go to the MS clinic for some time. In some ways, he's virtually lost all of his services. You know, people don't do house calls anymore. We have to change that. We have to ensure that people who become incapacitated because of illness and disease are still still have access. You shouldn't have to go to an emergency room and wait hours for care, really. So that's something I can do something about. While we're in the process of getting the scientific information that will allow us to proceed to medical trials, or clinical trials. Perhaps it's not enough, but it's a commitment I can make. I can make a commitment to do work to improve the services that we have for people who are living with MS and for their caregivers. Services that they require in their homes. And in some ways, I think, you know, one of the things we did was we expanded the caregiver's benefit. The caregiver's benefit, one of the things we really noticed when we introduced that benefit was that it was people with MS, a lot of people with MS, who were being cared for at home who weren't eligible because they didn't quite make that Maple 5. But they still had a significant need. And so, you know, we've expanded the benefit and it's captured some of those folks, and I'm really glad for that. Perhaps it hasn't captured enough, but you know, it's an incremental approach. We will do the best we can with the resources we have as we find resources. And I know staff in the department, we're very mindful of people with MS and their needs. We have a small drug program in the province of Nova Scotia that assists people with particular illnesses, including we have a specific small drug program for people with MS who do not have drug plans. And quite often, MS is a young person's disease. You know, people aren't necessarily of retirement age when they're diagnosed with MS. Quite the contrary, it often is a diagnosis they receive while they're young adults or in midlife. And they don't necessarily have a drug plan. So we have a small drug program, and about 673 people are enrolled in that program at a cost of about $8 million annually. And the number of people who are in that program has risen marginally between this year and last. And our commitment is to continue that program. And certainly that was one of the things that the MS Society and the clinic folks wanted to know from me when I met with, I went to one of their meetings last year. So I don't know if the member has any additional questions with respect to the government's position on MS. We also fund the MS Society about $242,000 a year. And, you know, I very much appreciate the work of all of these health charities, but especially the MS Society. They've had a difficult and challenging issue presented to them, a new therapy that has potential, and a divided membership with people who are very enthusiastic and want to try the treatment. And as well, I know because I met with their membership and I hear from people, there are people who are skeptical. And so there they are a voice, a representative for people with MS, and they have divided viewpoints on a very complicated issue. And it puts them in a difficult position. Sometimes they're a volunteer organization. They're there because they care about the issue. They often are people who have MS or have family members who have MS, or they work in the field with people who have MS. And, it's a challenging subject. But we live in challenging times, and I think the main thing that for everyone, I think the common ground for us all in this has to be hope, that we will keep moving forward to examine this treatment, and that we will keep an open mind. Dr. Murray, he's a recipient of the Order of Nova Scotia, and I think quite a wise individual. Keep an open mind. Do not close the door on this therapy, but do the work that's required to determine what it all means. Thank you, Madam Chair.
The honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, first and foremost, I want to make sure that everybody understands that I would never question the Minister's commitment to health care in the province of Nova Scotia or how she goes about her job. There is very few people who are as committed as she is to making her department work and work successfully for Nova Scotians. I have no problem saying that. Minister talked that this is not about money, and yet when she replied, she was quoting dollars that are being spent. And these are programs that are very important to the individuals. The minister said that this is about hope, and there is no question it is about hope. The minister says that we need to talk about scientific evidence. And that's important, and I would not be one to say that it's not. But there's another side to that coin for someone who suffers with MS. Imagine being with a life partner who has been diagnosed with MS, going to a doctor's office, sitting down, and being told by that doctor that the medication you're on is no longer working, that there is nothing else I can do for you. Go home and have a happy life. Imagine how one would feel. And then when somebody goes and has a treatment, experimental, different, challenging, whatever you want to call it, and there's a difference in that person's life, that person's quality of life has risen. And that's not just an experience that I've had, it's an experience that many Nova Scotians have had, and many people across this country. Minister talks about a meeting that was held in Newfoundland where they talked about this issue. And I remember her talking to us about that previously here in this House. And that was an important meeting, and I think it was one of her very first meetings. And at that time, she became chair of the health ministers across the province, across the country, I'm sorry. And that's a good thing for the province of Nova Scotia. But I can't help but wonder, Madam Chair, I can't help but wonder what the Minister of Health in Manitoba knows, or the Minister of Health in Saskatchewan knows, or even the Minister of Health in New Brunswick knows, because all of their governments have decided that MS, the liberation therapy, is worth doing some more things. The Minister made reference to the fact that indeed there are no actual clinical trials going on in Canada right now. And that is a very accurate statement. However, if we keep waiting and waiting and waiting, when will the individuals that are afflicted with MS be able to get some kind of answer? I can't understand, and many people who I've met who have MS, and I've had an opportunity to meet a lot of people across this province. Can't understand why indeed we can't be more proactive. Why this minister, as chair of the health ministers in the country of Canada, couldn't call a meeting and have that meeting held here in Nova Scotia to discuss where we are. A year has passed. So it's not inconceivable to think that after a year, we should have a knowledge of where we need to be. We've seen governments after governments saying that they want to get more involved. So why would the minister consider, I guess is my request, would the minister consider trying to get a health ministers meeting together to focus on MS, to find out where we have been since that meeting a year ago, where things are going, and why is it that governments like Manitoba and Saskatchewan are now investing in the liberation therapy?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I understand how strongly the honourable member feels about this issue. And I very much respect his tenacity. And I know it comes, though, from, a very sincere place and a very caring place. But I want to say that while it's true that Saskatchewan and Manitoba have made announcements about clinical trials that haven't happened yet, and while it's true that New Brunswick have talked about some financial support for people who do decide to leave New Brunswick for the procedure, I want to say that Ontario, Quebec, Alberta, British Columbia, Nova Scotia, and PEI are all on the same page, at least so far on this. And we all struggled at the meeting in Newfoundland around this issue, even Manitoba and Saskatchewan. Now, the member asked the question about convening a special meeting of provinces on this issue. What I would say to the member is this. In the not too distant future, there will be, what we do as the next meeting, so let me start by saying that the next regular meeting of provinces is, I think, not going to happen for some time. We're probably looking at the fall, which I feel is too far away for discussion on this matter with the other provinces. However, we do conference calls on a fairly regular basis, and there will be one fairly soon. And we have an opportunity to set the agenda for that call. And I certainly am prepared to ensure that this item is on the agenda for our conference call. And I want to tell the honourable member it would have been on the agenda without having this discussion. Because until this issue reaches its next logical conclusion, I think it is incumbent on myself, on all health ministers, not to allow this issue to disappear from the national conversation. And it won't, as long as we have an opportunity to be in the chair. I can assure you of that. It's an important issue. And it's an important issue to get some follow-up. We have these studies underway. It would be a very opportune time to get some results and find out at what stage we are in terms of getting information out of those studies. And that will allow us to really formulate and start planning ahead for clinical trials. And I see nothing wrong with that. See nothing wrong with you know, starting to think in that direction and look at what is the information that is coming forward. So I think that is the most realistic. This is a very important topic, and I don't want to, you know, be disrespectful around the topic or the request that the honourable member has made. Part of the problem, frankly, of meeting any time sooner than the fall is the number of provinces in this great country of ours that are going to the polls in the fall. And, you know, we get to host the next federal provincial meeting here in Nova Scotia. And just trying to find a date has been a bit of a challenge, I think, in some ways, because of the fact that so many provincial governments have fixed election dates and are going to the polls. And so it's very, very difficult to engage federal, provincial health ministers during such a time. But, you know, there will be a meeting. There will be a meeting eventually, and this, no doubt, again, will be a part of the agenda. But additionally, there will be discussion about a number of really important items by teleconference, and we can certainly move this forward on the agenda. So that's something that I can undertake to attempt to happen, Madam Chair.
Thank you. The honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank the minister. I would strongly encourage that during that telephone conference call, and indeed MS is a subject, and I would ask if she would consider bringing a report back to the hosts or to the different caucuses afterwards, as in relation to the discussions on MS and where that is. I know there will be many topics that we'll probably not be able to share, and we understand that. But if we could get an understanding of where the provincial health ministers of Canada are standing right now on the MS situation, I think that would serve MS patients here in the province of Nova Scotia and other areas very well. So I want to thank the minister and our staff for the opportunity to ask these few questions, and I'm going to share the rest of my time with the member from Argyll.
Thank you. The honourable member for Argyll.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and I do want to thank the minister for her thoughtfulness and her thoroughfulness on the issue of MS, and I know that our member from Cape Breton West, you know, he does wear his emotion on his sleeve a lot of the time. And I know that it's important not only to him but to our caucus, and I think everybody that sits in this legislature as we meet with constituents on a regular basis about this treatment and many other treatments as well. There doesn't really go by a day that many of us have a contact from someone that touches health in one way or another. Well, whether it's something happening at the hospital, whether it has to do with a treatment, whether it has to do with something to take care of our parents or our children. I'm going to run a few quick snappers because we have until I think 5:55 or 5:57. So I thought I'd ask some very basic questions and basically some continuation of projects that were were started under our government. I'm just wondering where they're sitting today. And the first one I'm going to ask about is the issue of radiation therapy and the cancer center at the Victoria General, just where that is in process. I know there was some dollars and the linear accelerator have been purchased, but there's still some work to be done to the hospitals. I'm just wondering maybe where that project is in sequence right now.
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
While the staff are digging out information on that, I want to thank the member for raising this issue because it is an important issue. Construction at Capital District Health Authority, it began in December 2010. It's expected to be completed during the fourth quarter of 11-12 fiscal year, and 3 radiation therapy units are expected to be purchased during 11-12, and we have new money in this budget for that. Last year we put in, I think, $10 million for this. Now, the member would know that the province of Nova Scotia was a signatory to the radiation wait time guarantee that was signed between the federal government and the province. While there was some federal money in this, it's mostly provincial money that's in this. And I think one of the first things I did as minister was had to make a decision about going across the street with my hat in my hand to the Treasury Board and making the case for why we needed an appropriation of an additional, I think it was close to $10 million, because it wasn't there in the budget. It hadn't been budgeted for, even though that commitment had been made. But you know, it's an important commitment to keep. Rates of cancer in our province continue to grow, and they're projected to continue to grow for some time. It's a multi-million-dollar project. We also upgraded in Cape Breton as well. And one of the things that I'm very pleased to talk about is the fact that we are meeting our wait times guarantee. And this will allow us not only to meet them, but to continue to meet them as there's a growth in the need for cancer treatment. And there's nothing more difficult, and I'm preaching to the converted, I know. The former Minister of Health is well aware of what it's like to have a phone call or an email or a visit from someone who's experiencing a cancer diagnosis and they're waiting for treatment, and they want your help. And so anything we can do to ensure that people get timely access, and the great team over at the Cancer Centre here in Cape Breton, phenomenal, just phenomenal people.
The Honourable Member for Argyll.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and Madam Minister. No, it is definitely a project that has taken a number of years to really pull forward. And if I remember, the whole rundown on things was money from the feds where it was available to help to purchase the equipment. And then sort of at the 11th hour, we were told that there had to be a renovation to the hospital in order to accept those facilities. Sort of, they didn't in 1 minute, and the next minute they did. And I thank the minister for going with her hat in hand for a little bit in finding those extra dollars to make sure that it does happen. I had the opportunity a few months ago to visit the Cape Breton Cancer Centre with the CEO from district, John Malcolm, and what a wonderful facility that turns out. You know, he talked about the challenge of working with an old machine. And that's kind of what we've got right now are a few old machines. And these are very resourceful technologists, technicians that keep our machines running. And John sort of told the story. He said, "Listen, I was working my best to try to keep that machine running until the new one was in place, and then once the new one was in place, then I could sort of catch up. But I guess it wasn't soon after the new one was turned on that the other one had to be shut down and go for a full refit, because ultimately they had used it so much to treat patients in the Cape Breton area. So I just sort of say it's just-in-time delivery, I guess, is what we're trying to say. And I'm hoping that as the project comes to its completion in 2011, 2012, that we don't have any mishaps with the machines we do have today treating patients. So it's good to have that that update on that. There was the added piece to the Cancer Centre in Yarmouth, and I just want to talk to the minister a little bit on how successful that one is. I've talked to many patients that have had the opportunity to visit a cancer centre in their own hospice facility, and how they find that to be much more comforting, much easier than having to take that long trek here to Halifax. And really is what's happening, even though it is only a medical oncology unit. To be able to do it there is phenomenal, and I know you've had the opportunity to visit that site, but I would probably guess it has the best view of any unit that we have anywhere in Nova Scotia, as it actually sits on the end of the hospital and overlooks the Yarmouth Harbour. It would have been a time you would have seen a cat coming up and down the harbour, but it doesn't today. Maybe someday, we'll hope. And I'm looking over at the Minister of Economic Development as well. The next question I have is around Lucentis, and I know that's not going to give us a lot of time to talk about this one, but I'm just wondering, because we've gotten a couple of letters in around the availability of that service in other areas. My understanding up to now that the only opportunity to get the Lucentis injections is here at Capital Health. And I know there's been talking about expanding that, but what I've heard is there's individuals in, I believe it's Antigonish, that have the equipment in order to do that, but they're not being recognized to be able to do those injections. And I don't know about Cape Breton District, but it does anything that we can do to sort of stop the traveling. Let's say somebody from Cape North has to drive all the way to Halifax, it's a long ways. But if even you could cut that in half and let them go to Antigonish, I think is a phenomenal piece. So I'm just wondering if there's an expansion to the Lucentis programs to allow that injection to happen in other sites other than Capital Health.
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I really want to thank the honourable member for for a number of things, reminding me of how beautiful Yarmouth is from the cancer treatment centre there at the regional hospital. Unbelievable. Great staff, and it's been too long a time since I've been to Yarmouth, so I'm glad he reminded me of that. With respect to Lucentis, Madam Chair, you'll know how hard we worked in the Department of Health to get this treatment to improve the quality of lives of people who have wet macular degeneration. And it's a very expensive drug, and by delivering it in the hospitals, we found a way to afford this drug. But I want to reassure the honourable member that right from the get-go, when we looked at this, I talked to staff in the department about how we might decentralize this treatment in the longer term. Because I recognize that it's not easy for some people to drive from parts of the province to Halifax for treatment. I do know that the majority of people who are receiving Lucentis treatment we're in fact getting it here in Metro from the retinal specialists. And so when we established the program, the 1st of January of this year, we started with the retinal specialists here at the Queen Elizabeth in the clinic, and we wanted to see how that would go. And you know, I've had probably the same correspondence that the member has from a few people, particularly from a few people from the Antigonish area. And, you know, I know that the staff are working. We have looked at what this might mean elsewhere, but we're still, frankly, establishing the program here and working all of the little bugs out of it. You know, as the member knows, Madam Chair, as a former Minister of Health, the best of intentions can often have their little sidebars, and this one is no different. And so we'll work our way through those issues, and then certainly we will look at what else we might do. But right now, I think we are doing the best we can to get this. I've had, you know, in addition to the 1 or 2 letters I might have had from, you know, the Antigonish area, I have had letters from people all over the province saying, thank you, thank you. This has taken such a burden off us. And, you know, people were paying $2,000 an injection for Lucentis. So, you know, I know that it can be expensive having to drive, especially these days. We're watching the price of fuel shoot up week over week and what have you. But just the same, people are in fact saving a real amount of money compared to what it was that they were paying. And it is a drug that does make a significant difference. I mean, it's quite incredible, really, that it can actually reverse the condition for some people. So you have to see the importance of this particular treatment and the improvement it can make. And I assure members that we will very much keep in mind the additional burden this places as well. The other thing we're watching is wait times to get into the clinic here. So, you know, if you're bringing everybody in from across the province, you want to make sure that they have timely access and they can get in, and that waits don't become unmanageable and what have you. But we will work with people around the province, both people who are delivering this treatment, as well as the retinal specialists who are here at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital.
Order, please. We have now, we are now approaching the moment of interruption, so I now ask for consideration that I recognize the Government House Leader to close business of the Committee of the Whole. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that the committee do now rise, that you report progress and beg leave to sit again.
Thank you. The motion is carried. The committee will now rise and report its business to the House.
The Chair of the Committee of the Whole House on Supply reports
that the Committee of the Whole has met, has made progress, and begs leave to sit again.
I will now recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that concludes the government's business for today, and I now give over to the House Leader of the Official Opposition.
The Government House Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Tomorrow, the House will sit in the hours 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. and following the daily routine and question period, we'll be calling Opposition Business Resolution 280 and Resolution 295. I move that we do now adjourn until 2 p.m. tomorrow.
Question for adjournment. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against? Motion is carried. We have now reached the hour of interruption, and as the debate was chosen earlier, therefore be it resolved that the government provide funding and recognize the importance of the Bay Plex geothermal project, a pioneering initiative that could serve as the benchmark for geothermal capabilities throughout Nova Scotia, submitted by the Honourable Member for Halifax-Caton Park. I will now recognize the Honourable Member for